Today I'm going to show you how to design and tattoo a simple name tattoo. First of all, if you want a basic generic font for your name tattoo, the best website I can recommend is thefont.com. There's loads of options on there, especially when it comes to calligraphy and handwritten styles of script. You can see we can select a bunch of different options. We can type in whatever name that we want, and thousands of options are going to pop up. If you don't want something generic and you want to be able to hand draw your own script, I'm going to show you the real basics of how I would go about drawing a script tattoo. A nice grid to keep everything uniform and nice and neat. So what I can do is create my line for a top, bottom and middle. A lot of the time I like to do a curvy line. I don't like to do a straight line because a curvy line just gives you a little bit more movement in the design and the tattoo. I like to create a diagonal line which is going to be the angle of my letters. I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to keep moving them along, and this is going to keep everything nice and uniform. As I said, it's going to make sure that every letter is at the same angle, and it's going to make our script design look really neat. So that's on the same layer. I've taken down the opacity, and all that we have to do from here is basically follow our grid. So the name today is Lenny, so I'm going to use my capital L and I'm going to work in the same angle as my lines that I've done on my grid. It's going to follow the same, that line on the N, and then you can see all of these diagonal lines are all going to follow the same angle as well. As I come down, I'm following this same angle, and then as I connect the ends again. And that's not a bad sketch to start off with. That's a good bit of inspiration to start off my design. The beautiful thing about the iPad is that I can select that L and I can just shift it over and make life a little bit easier for myself. And the one thing to note is the balance in the design. So the fact that I have a loop over here on the far left, on the bottom right I wanted a loop as well to be able to balance the overall design. And because the L is quite a bit bigger and it's got the loop, having that loop on the Y helps it balance out a little bit more. So now that we've got that, all that is left to do is to trace over that. That's been done in my Procreate pencil. I can create a new layer. I can come over to my inking, and I like to either use something like the gel pen or the studio pen. The studio pen is probably my favorite when it comes to making my stencils. So once I've traced over that, you can see that I've created one this morning, a custom bit of font. But the ideas that my client originally sent me were quite generic fonts. So I've got a few options for her to choose from. Out of all of the options, I've created duplicate sizes so that once she's in, she can pick the one that she wants at the right size, and then we're ready to go. And while I wait for my client, it's a good opportunity for me to set up my station and prepare my stencil. So I'm going to put up a list of everything that I used for this tattoo and how I set up my machine. You can see that my machine is set to about 7 volts and a 3.9 stroke so that I can be a little bit more delicate with my fine line tattoo. And when it comes to my machine, you can see I'm going to get my machine out of my UV sterilizer, my Dragonhawk mast sterilizer. I like to unscrew the grip and put it in separately with the machine, and then once it's sterilized I can screw it back together, put it back together again, and then begin wrapping up my tattoo machine for my tattoo. I'll use a clipcord sleeve to cover up the very end of my grip. You can see that I'll tape it down securely. I'll wrap around a bit of tissue for extra padding, and then I'll use my grip tape to finish it off which is nice and clean, it's secure, and it's comfortable for myself as well. And wrapping up the furniture is just as important as the station. So I've got these disposable pillowcases for my pillows. The bed is well wrapped up, as well as my armrest. And then once my client arrives, we decided on one of the more basic designs. And we begin by cleaning the area with our green soap and water mix and shaving the area. You can see to create a center mark for my stencil, I've creased it in half. I've created a center line of where I'd like the design to go and marked that out. And you can see for a tattoo this size how much stencil stuff I need. Just a bit on the end of my finger. That's more than enough for me to rub into the skin. Make sure that the skin's going to really soak up that stencil stuff, which is going to allow the carbon stencil to absorb into the skin and give me a really nice stencil. So I can check that over, make sure all of the detail is there, and we're ready to work. I apply a little bit of pressure to make sure that myself and my client is comfortable. The stencil was dried for 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that it's not going to smudge. And I've set my machine. I'm happy with my depth. And I'm going to work from the right hand side so that I don't lose my stencil as I'm tattooing. And as I begin tattooing, I don't actually aim for my desired depth straight away. So obviously we know that we want to be working with a specific depth, and then we want to keep it there and be working consistent to get our nice line work. But at the very start of the line, what I like to do is introduce the very tip of my needle to the skin and then sink down to my desired depth. So being able to get to my desired depth, first of all, what I need to do is make sure that I know exactly where the tip of my needle is. I'll let the tip of the needle hit the surface of the skin, and then I can sink my needle down. I'll try to pull a line towards me as much as possible. I don't mind pushing a line away from me. The main thing that you need to consider if you're going to do that is making sure that your hand speed, the needle depth, everything is consistent. You want to be coming into the skin at the right angle, the stretch of the skin. Everything has to be consistent. As long as you've got consistent method and a good application, you can get away with pushing or pulling your lines. No matter what direction you're working in, a mistake I was making early on in my career, which I realized, was that as I was moving around the skin, I wasn't keeping my needle depth consistent 100%. I was noticing that my needle depth was slightly changing as I was moving around the skin, slightly based on my comfort and my lack of understanding and awareness of my needle depth and how precise I needed to be, and also how consistent I needed to be once I had the precise part of my needle that I wanted to work with. When it comes to our stroke and our voltage and the pressure that we're putting on, we're letting the machine and the needle do the work. I'm really not putting much pressure. I'm actually being very delicate and fragile. I'm working with the tip of my needle. It's very easy to go too deep. So I'm being very delicate in my pressure. The stroke and the voltage, it takes a little bit of getting advice from other people and then experimenting with it yourself to figure out what voltage and stroke is going to suit you. You also need to marry these things up with your hand speed. So you can see I'm moving quite slow. This fine line stuff requires a bit of accuracy, finesse, and a delicate approach. So in order to do that, I like to take a little bit more time, spend a little bit more time in the skin. In order to do that, I'm going to turn my voltage down and my stroke down a little bit. It's going to be less traumatic, it's going to be hitting the skin less frequently, and it's going to allow me to take more time and have a more delicate approach. With that being said, it's not so low that I have to apply too much pressure. There's enough voltage and enough of a punch on the stroke that the machine and the needle is going to do the work for me. I'm just in control of where the machine and the needle is going. I'm in control of the depth, and the machine and the needle is going to actually power the line in. If you feel like no matter what depth you're using, you're not getting a solid enough line, it's probably because you don't have enough voltage or your stroke isn't big enough. If you want to keep learning with me, you can join my online tattoo course at thebuzzacademy.com. Watch at your own pace. I've got 8 in-depth chapters where I cover technical tattooing, drawing, hygiene. You'll watch me tattoo fake skin, real skin. You'll learn everything that you need to know to go from a beginner to a confident tattoo artist.